Welcome to another episode of Electable. I'm Deb Chubb, and this podcast is sponsored by the Indiana Women's Action Movement. We're here today for our fourth installment of a report on the circus show of our Indiana Attorney General, Todd Rokita. So Destiney Scott Wells has been with us before several times and is just an outstanding legal expert on the state of Indiana and the Attorney General's office and what should be happening. And of course, a great explanation of what is actually happening in the Attorney General's office. So we have so many things that we don't even have time to do a recap of all of the crazy issues that we have already covered in our three previous interviews. So today we're going to move right along. And of course, the big issue that we are most familiar about concerning Todd Rokita is his not so recently, I guess in the last month or so, released parental bill of rights as to education. So Destiny, tell us what this one is all about.
Right. And we do this every episode, right? We're like, we only have so much time to talk about everything that he's done in just the last month.
Right.
So the office puts out a parents' bill of rights, and this is directly linked to their website. And it's basically 5-6 points on what parents can do to be more involved with their children's education and their school board and finding out curriculum. Just give some common knowledge that parents should be already privy to. However, it kind of takes a nosedive at the end of the Parents' Bill of Rights and gets very divisive and starts talking about the 1916 Project and critical race theory in schools. And so at the time, and we've talked about this before, we talked about how CRT was, becoming a big topic of conversation. So Rokita jumps on it and issues out this Parents' Bill of Rights, starts hitting the news circuits on it, and then also starts making appearances throughout Indiana discussing the Parents' Bill of Rights, even up in Kosciuszko County, Winona Lake. He had a big event there discussing the Parents' Bill of Rights. Why do I say that? Because if you see it for what it really is, it's just an opportunity for more earned media. Right. So he wants
just to be clear, he had literally he went approached the county commissioners of Kosciuszko County and offered to bring enlightenment about critical race theory and how it impacts education in Indiana. Neglecting to acknowledge that county commissioners have zero influence on schools and boards of education. And so none of that had any real possibility of making any real influence, except for, as you say, a little earned media.
Right. I mean, I've heard of from some other elected officials, that their town had been contacted saying, do you need the AG services to come talk about anything that people may be interested in? And at the time, at that week, it was critical race theory.
Right. And as we saw that kind of enter school board meetings, it really kind of fell apart very quickly. It became apparent that parents and school boards were realizing that this was absolutely a non-issue. No one could actually define what they were even yelling about. And when they did talk about some extremist view, that wasn't really even happening. So I do want to keep our eye on the whole mask issue that is now the big screaming issue in schools. And we haven't really seen anything on from Todd Rokita on that issue yet, but we'll have to just keep an eye out for that.
Well, he had a previous issue with the masks and the governor. And technically the governor is his client. And so that was months ago where he said something really contradictory to the governor's interest in wearing masks, and raised ethical questions, because you don't speak badly about a client, let alone to the press, and it's the governor. But going back, I want to highlight that the Parents' Bill of Rights, that was not done in coordination with what agency? The Department of Education. So you have, again, the Attorney General acting outside of the scope of his responsibilities and really abusing the office for what we all know is probably a 2024 run for governor. We've been saying that on the previous episodes. So no coordination with the Department of Education, and then also really just ruffled the feathers, rightfully so, of entities like the Black Legislative Caucus. So the IBLC sat down with him a week or two ago to talk about the Parents' Bill of Rights, because when you look at the language in it, it just causes further division. It talks, when I said it talked about CRT in the 1916 project, which is really a lesson in history from the viewpoint of those who were enslaved. So by Black people and the oppression that it's caused, generationally. He says that that's being taught through a, quote, narrow prism of race. And I don't really know how you teach slavery through anything other than the prism of race, but he had a problem with it. And so he calls terms like diversity and equity just euphemisms, to discuss CRT. And then he says that these practices are, in his Parents' Bill of Rights, he says that they're consistently being backdoored into Indiana classrooms through things like social emotional learning. That's why you've heard SELs talked about lately. So he has this meeting with the Black Legislative Caucus. Then he tweets it, look at me. I'm talking to the IBLC about this. And then they immediately put out a statement that says, hey, we actually called him to the table, and then kind of makes, they say, we look forward to him basically improving the Parents' Bill of Rights, to not be. So I don't know, read between the lines, racist.
Right. You just cannot give enough credit to the IBLC for their grace, under this sort of attack. And just, always maintaining a rational, intelligent perspective.
Exactly.
On this.
And their statement was definitely steeped in grace, very restrained, but did call him out on the issue. This issue starts to quiet down because Rokita claims a victory. The Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, backs off some language in some grant application language that was the focus of the CRT and 1916 project. They were trying to say that the federal government had these strings attached to these grants. So they back away from that language, and then Todd, claims that as a victory of his own and moves on to the next thing.
All right, which is, I don't think this is a really new thing, right? This is the whole investigating China's propaganda and, infusion into American post-secondary education. So, oh my gosh, Joe McCarthy, here we come. So, so tell us about the China issue.
I'm just gonna be frank. So we pivot from Black people to Asian people. That's the pivot we've done. We see all the time little pings from him on defund the police. Just in the last couple of weeks, he's went after Representative Cori Bush. He talked about the Chinese, but yet still went after LeBron James, one of police reform. So, I'm very open with saying I don't often ever find that he attacks white people. So he goes on to China, and we're now investigating Valparaiso University. But he's kind of spinning it like we're investigating the Chinese through Valpo. But in fact, what he's doing is he's using different vehicles that we've like the Deceptive Consumer Sales Act to get to Valpo because of their ties with a program called the Confucius Institute. So and actually, let me back up. Deb, I'm sorry. There's always
it's complicated.
The week before this, I want to tell you this before we jump, because it's a little bit of a deep dive into the Confucius Institute. The week before, he had an internal email leaked by his own staff, because everybody's just, a lot of people are upset about the open xenophobia and racism that he does act with. And so this email is leaked where he is scaling back their progression on their phased plan of getting back completely to the office. And he says that it is, quote, in his email, this email is grammatically butchered. It's awful. So, quote, given the uncertainty are silly in the number of China virus cases and the new Delta variant. So he calls COVID-19 the China virus. We've talked about in previous episodes that he's done this on major networks, like I believe like Fox. And so it's nothing new, him calling it the China virus. But you know what? I don't know the diversity within the current staff, but can you imagine being, from the API community and getting an email like this at work? It just has to be so uncomfortable. So he does this, and then on Monday, we're investigating China.
Just the notion, yeah, it just sounds so ridiculous. Let's investigate China.
So he says that they're investigating Confucius Institute's association with Valpo, quote, to uncover whether the Chinese government has attempted to impose its political influence on Hoosier students by shaping and limiting our perspective of China and the Chinese government through the Confucius Institute. So basically, hey, I believe that an arm of Chinese propaganda is at play at Valpo, and I think I need to look into it.
It all just, eventually it will become clear that this is really just another way to get headlines. But it is just so outrageous. Valparaiso University is a Lutheran college.
Right. So their statement immediately is like, hey, this doesn't even comport with our Christian values.
Right.
If this is happening, if communism is being taught at a Christian university. So the Confucius Institute, what is it? There are programs all across the US. At one time, it was like almost up to 100 at different universities where they have a contract with the Confucius Institute. And the Confucius Institute is part of basically the Chinese government. And so the Chinese government has a lot of influence on what they're doing, right? And the program has been shut down at other universities. IUPUI recently shut theirs down, Purdue. And that's because the federal government has already been looking into it. The federal government's already aware. The State Department's been looking into it. The FBI's been looking into it. The Senate did a whole subcommittee investigation on it. And I think like it was titled China's Impact on the US Education System. And it went through all of this. So this is just redundant. It's him after the fact. There's not going to be anything that really comes out of this.
Well, no one's going to have a headline if he can't be in it. He's got to be named or it can't happen.
Right. So go ahead. No. This propaganda arm, it's what is referred to as, soft power, right? It should be noted that the United States also does this. We have partnerships, the State Department, and you know how cagey academia can be about having government influence on their curriculum. So the State Department has partnered with some universities, and they have these American cultural centers across the globe in China, and they've also been shut down. So I just want to tease this out. So when the Senate investigated this, the State Department reported that they had some visa issues, right? So a research visa versus a teaching visa. A teaching visa is more difficult to obtain than a research visa. So Chinese students, professors, whatever, would come over on a research visa, but then they would end up teaching in a classroom Mandarin. And, your average teacher, American teacher, doesn't speak Mandarin. So they don't necessarily know what's being told, right? So there is the ability to, teach propaganda. I don't know what you're really going to teach to pre-K. You're probably just going to be in violation of your visa because you're supposed to be doing primarily research. Okay, now let's think about this. We have somebody who's American, they go over to China on a similar type of research visa, and they're teaching ESL on the side.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so these are the kind of things but this is what the Senate looked into, and what they did find were that there were some of these visa violations that they needed to shore up, and that universities hadn't been reporting their foreign gifts.
Oh,
because the Confucius Institute does pay in this program to have this program in the university. It's only like a couple $100,000 a year. And so you'll hear Todd Rokita say that Valpo's taken over $1 million from the Chinese government. But you know what? That's because Valpo reported it, that he has that information. It's public, it's out there. I pulled it this morning, and it has them reporting over $200,000 from the Chinese government, 2016, 18, and 19. So only by virtue of them following the rules has he become privy to this information. And so what they say is that he has sent a letter, and what should follow is he's claiming that they may be in violation of the 1965 Higher Education Act. That it requires that foreign reporting. So it may be in violation, doesn't appear so. And then also that they are in violation of the Indiana Deceptive Consumer Sales Act. Now that is a vehicle that Todd, or that Rokita, is using to open up investigations into multiple entities. It's written very broadly by the legislature so that it is a tool for him to look into, any type of malfeasance by businesses out there that are taking advantage of consumers. Back to our first episode, we talked about them doing, consumer protection. Oh, it's just this little thing on the side. It's a big deal, but it's just consumer protection. No, Rokita has managed to use his tools for consumer protection to have to cover his very broad agenda on all things not consumer protection.
Well, right. And I mean, sort of, baseless accusations, baseless investigations, intended really just to get in a headline. I think you've pointed out before that these investigations are not effective. They don't result in any actual anything. And so it's really just, it feels like just a waste of money.
Right. And we talked about it before, that he did this with big tech. So this is a playbook that's being ran right now by Republican attorneys general. And so you'll see that Rokita has actually followed Bill Paxton, the federally indicted attorney general from Texas, because he used his deceptive, I think it's the DTPA, the Deceptive Trade Practices Act in Texas, to get to big tech. And Twitter, felt that this was very retaliatory. It was over the Trump tweets. Mm-hmm. And so they filed lawsuit against Texas saying this was First Amendment retaliation. But the court said, hey, this is premature. You don't file a lawsuit against them. You just don't answer these civil investigative demands, and then they file against you. And so that takes into question, is anybody really answering Rokita's civil, his CIDs? CIDs, just for everybody, it's like an administrative subpoena. And so you can use it when you are investigating something if you believe a statute's been violated. And that statute that he's using, again, is the Indiana DCSA.
But it's short of a subpoena, right? So it's kind of a preliminary investigative tool.
Right. The federal government has this tool too. Theirs actually has criminal penalties if you don't answer, but ours doesn't. Ours, you can be tagged with attorney's fees if it gets dragged into court, and you should have answered.
So for the
But
most part, he issues these, the respondent doesn't answer, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Is that right?
well, I think probably Valpo, well, it's likely they'll answer because the evidentiary threshold to have these CIDs is extremely low. You just have to have an open investigation, and that the person that you have served the CID on may have some knowledge. So, for example, when Rokita had opened up his investigation into big tech, also which we haven't heard much about, when he opened it up against big tech, he served these CIDs on we've discussed before 10 civil rights leaders, again, who none were white. So the 10 civil rights leaders that had met with Zuckerberg at Facebook, the A team shows up and has a meeting with him. And out of all the meetings that Zuckerberg has on a daily basis, this is the one meeting where Rokita wants to know more information. So he serves these on all 10 of them, and then he gets to talk about it and say, look at me. They're all out of state. So, it's a bit of trouble for the AG's office in Indiana to track these people down. You have to kind of go after them within their own jurisdiction. So the person that you serve the CID on, where they live or where they do business, not necessarily in the state of Indiana like Valpo.
Which requires an extra expense of hiring local counsel, I'm sure. Anyway, it's just so frustrating. And I'll say, it begins to dawn on me, where this is going, where this is heading. Who all will be victim of the CID attack? And as you say, if you're in Indiana, you're more amenable to that demand for information than if you were out of state. And so you have to wonder who else in Indiana is going to be subject to this kind of investigation, that is based on nothing, and then is followed with these, time-consuming, costly demands for information. So, which will naturally bring us to our next topic, and that is reproductive rights for women. I think that, that's one of the first ones that comes up in my mind. We've had bills before that have attempted to delve into the private medical records of women who seek out abortions. And even this past year, the bills that were out there that wanted a report about the mental health of women who sought out abortions, as if, those women's HIPAA rights and their rights to private medical records are an exception, that they don't get to have privacy. And that's there's been several attempts over the years to get records of women who seek out and other reproductive health services. So anyway, I got a little digress there. I'm sorry. So if you're ready to move on to that topic, I know that you have some good information to share about that, about the recent court case or decision that took out several of the Indiana restrictions on abortion rights. And of course, we'll have to start thinking about what is going to happen as a result of that.
So it seems every session, the Indiana legislature pushes out some bills that seem just on their face unconstitutional when it comes to women's reproductive freedom. Not to get personal, but usually it come from Representative Peggy Mayfield down in near my hometown in Morgan County. And so it ends up tied up in litigation. It just seems every year they keep many organizations busy, like, the ACLU and such. So this case was from Whole Women's Health versus Rokita, and it was a 2008. It started out as a 2018 case. So technically it probably was Hill and then switched out with Rokita. It was in front of Judge Sarah Evans Barker from the
a real personal hero of mine. I love her. She's awesome.
From the Indiana Southern District. It had a lot of provisions in it, and she ended up striking down quite a few provisions in her opinion that she issued, I think, like last week. And so But she, at the same time, she did hold up some. So some she struck down were bans on the use of telemedicine in abortion care, which became very, very important during the pandemic. In-person examinations before abortions. Let me see. I have a list here.
Go ahead.
A requirement that only physicians can administer first trimester medication abortions, a requirement that second trimester abortions must be performed in a hospital or ambulatory outpatient surgical center, and other requirements on abortion facilities. And I think there were actually a couple more. So, but those are kind of the big ones. The telemedicine one was big, especially now we're back with the Delta variant, right? I mean, because women were being were having to go and leave their homes when they were supposed to be, staying at home.
Right.
And, but at the same time, it upheld the ultrasound requirement before an abortion.
The 18-hour notice, or 18-hour, informative thing. You had a waiting period. That's what it was. Yeah. And then I think the parental consent as well was upheld.
Yes. And so that the patient has to delay her abortion for at least 18 hours after receiving her state mandated disclosures. So what that means, it requires women to take more time off work, if you're driving far, just all these additional hurdles that really call into question the undue burden standard under Casey. And so this happened. So it's a win, but it's also, it's probably more a bigger loss for Rokita. And so they appeal it right away, which is pretty standard. He likes to talk about running up the chain to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court's already granted cert on another case called Dobbs v. Jackson. And that case is going to look at whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. Just the court granting cert, which is now a 6-3 conservative court, just them granting cert is a huge deal. That is a huge deal. And I feel like we've all, those who do support our women's reproductive health, we've all gotten a little complacent because for years they have talked about limiting Roe v. Wade. And it's just kind of like out there like, sure. Because the Supreme Court would never take it up. And so this is the real deal, folks. It's being heard at the earliest next spring and then or into early or late next spring into early summer. And this is going to have, this may have a big impact. So what does this have to do with the AG? The AG made an appearance on Saturday on a podcast or radio show that he likes to a lot. But, he retweets the title of the show and it says, what did we say? Oh, yeah. State's top attorney takes aim at court of Southern Indiana. It just is like this. It's just kind of out of bounds, right? For an AG to say they're going directly after the court. And then also when you listen to it, they're talking about the judge, not referring to her as the judge, and it just has a tenor that is a little disturbing. And
so back in the Trump administration, that sort of misogyny, that sort of xenophobia, that kind of double down aggression, kind of white male, aggression kind of approach, that was it was very popular. And it tended to work. But I think that has really peaked out. And I really think that is on the downslide now. And you can feel it. It doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right.
Right.
And I think that
that's going to show. No one's off the table though for him except white men. Right. I mean, we've talked about the Black community. He's been very forward with his anti-Asian hate, perpetuating that. And this is the women. And so from a higher strategic standpoint on this case, not on his case, on Dobbs v. Jackson. When this comes out, this will come out around the May primaries for the midterms. So we'll already be stuck with our candidates probably at that time. But if this comes out and does in fact chip away at Roe. And it probably, I mean, the courts never had much comfort with the viability issue. So
Right.
if it's chipped away at, or let alone if it's, if they do away with Roe, it is going to cause such a ruckus with the public.
Right.
And expect that the Indiana legislature will have more unconstitutional bills at the ready, waiting
Well,
for,
what will no longer be considered unconstitutional.
waiting for this opinion.
Right.
So, it remains to be seen, but you're going to have people like the AG continuing to appeal what are now still considered unconstitutional laws. And then the AG says, well, we just really have this patchwork of abortion doctrine throughout the US, and we need the Supreme Court to put it in order for us. And that's because we have all these Republican legislatures across the US, the state legislatures, passing unconstitutional laws, right? And
Right.
forcing courts to talk about what an undue burden is against women. So really, it's like, we've said this before, setting the house on fire and then, yelling for somebody to bring the fire hose or whatever. That's kind of what this feels like.
Gosh. Well, and I will say that it's my opinion anyway that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's argument that this case, Roe v. Wade, should not have been decided based on privacy rights, but should have been decided on equal protection issues, and that would have, I think, held up much better. And it's so interesting because now, in all the popular banter that's out there about my liberty rights to not wear a mask, even if it might harm another life, it all kind of brings that all into some clarity. And certainly when I hear people say, requiring me to wear a mask just so that somebody else might not die, I say, okay, so you'll be standing with me, right, to protect my constitutional right to my liberty, my right to financial security, and my right to protect my own health and possibly my life, even if it might affect another life, right? So you'll be with me, right? And then everything goes quiet.
Yeah. And also on the responsibility, like, you need to be more responsible when practicing sexual intercourse or abstain altogether. Okay. Well, you need to be responsible and wear a mask.
Yeah, right. No, that's all, suddenly that's all different. So I think, I'm really hoping on this equal protection approach, and hope that somebody can argue that and really, just acknowledge that, women actually do have liberty rights, and pregnant women should not be singled out and exempted from their own personal liberty rights. So let's hope it goes there. So I'll be yelling about it.
Worth noting that there are multiple Indiana male legislators that believe there should be no abortion whatsoever. Even for a pregnant mother who has a non-viable pregnancy, like Senator Braun.
Right. It is shocking.
Disturbing. It is utterly disturbing.
It is. And of course, when you hear all the rants, never once is the woman actually mentioned. It's like, as if this fetus is, running around, on its own, ready to pop out and go play baseball in the backyard. There is this woman involved in all of this. There is this pregnant woman who's risking her health, risking her life, and most certainly risking her financial security because of this law. So, how about let's talk about, the women. But let's do that. So I did want to kind of tie that in there, that I think I really fear those CIDs that you called them, the investigative demands, that might enter this realm as well. And we need to be careful. We need to be looking forward to see where this is going. Certainly, he has no intention of stopping this nonsense. These baseless investigations. Of course, I wish I could find out how much that is costing the state of Indiana. But he has no intention of stopping anytime soon. As long as he can get a headline, it doesn't matter, who's in the way and who is victimized by it. So, so we need to, be thinking carefully about what is coming next from him.
Yeah. I mean, you'll hear people say, what does this have to do with the Deceptive Consumer Sales Act? What does Valpo and the Chinese government have to do with that? And, Rokita's quote in response to this investigation was, our office will use every tool at our disposal to protect Hoosiers and put liberty into action. So any tool.
To make sure I get a headline.
That's the one he has discovered that is at his disposal.
So, let's hope there's a bottom. Let's hope there's somebody who can say, no, you have to have some basis. You have to have some realistic basis for all of these investigations. You can't keep wasting our tax dollars on this.
And the Indiana Supreme Court did speak to this during A.G. Carter's administration. Somebody fought a CID, and they let the AG's office move forward with the CID, but they did forewarn, that history has taught that power can be abused, and that CIDs shouldn't be abused for fishing expeditions or retaliation, and that they need to be tied to a legitimate investigation and impose a mild deterrent to arbitrary use of government authority to not. And so they foreshadowed this, maybe to be revisited. Maybe somebody will fight it. We'll see.
Right. Well, and I think it's up to us to remind Rokita of the fact that the court has recognized that there should be some limitation on this, and that unbridled use of it is not acceptable. Right. So we just need to keep saying it.
We've been screaming it, Deb.
I'm sorry?
We've been screaming it.
We are. We'll continue.
That's what we can do right now.
All right. Okay. So, so there was so much. I mean, at some point, I don't know how we'll put together a recap of everything. I think it's worth it just because there's been so many things, and most of them, he ends up losing, the whole thing of this fight with the governor, he got really smacked down by the courts on that one. And all these other things, maybe not so noisily, but have, really not succeeded. So it is all just a bunch of nonsense. So
I'm sure he'll cap it all. He will do it in his run for governor. It'll be in his campaign. All the things that he did, went after big tech, went after the Chinese.
With zero success. And
after all of them.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we're out of time, but this was great. As always, Destiney, you are just fantastic. You know so much, and I so appreciate your expertise on all of these issues. And we will be continuing. I'm very confident that we will be back here again with even more interesting things to talk about in the Todd Rokita circus show in Indiana. So thanks again.
Thank you.